Ajahn Kovilo and I have a joke where we say he's always trying to invite me to join him in book clubs. I feel like he just snuck one in there in the guided meditation. It got me. It's interesting. One of the epithets of the Buddha is knower of the worlds. And Ajahn Yaniko has reflected that as a monastic, it's particularly appropriate because people speak to you often about what's going on in their lives. People don't tend to talk to us about the Seahawks game. And so you get to see people's worlds. And you get to see how this unifying thread of suffering, the binding wound which we all come into this world with. In Thailand, the monks will welcome people to the monastery by saying, "Welcome, brothers and sisters in birth, aging, and death." Quite uplifting. But there is something grounding in it. The uplift can come later, but first that grounding in seeing how despite the veneer, despite our best efforts, our lives are always falling apart. I have a friend whose wife just gave birth, and she nearly died. She lost half her blood. I didn't even know people could lose half their blood and still survive. We have other community members who have cancer. A Sangha member at Sims just died in a car wreck. And then we have these more common but pervasive forms of dukkha, of life just not completely lining up like we'd hope, the relationship changing, the career shifting, funding cuts, job changes, or even just the sense that even though everything is going well enough, something's always off. There's always this one wheel of the shopping cart kind of spinning around and steering you into the laundry detergent. I'm struck by how there's a moment in the afternoon when I've always, since I was a child, noticed a shift in the light where suddenly the sunlight becomes sad. And these are endings. These are endings. And we spend our whole lives running from dukkha. The Buddhists, or the commentaries say that what obscures dukkha is movement. So always we're chasing after the next thing, running into the next birth, the next job, the next distraction. And yet Dhamma and the truth of dukkha, the entropy, the splinter of entropy embedded in each of our hearts when we come into this world, continues to rise up like a ball submerged underwater, and it keeps popping up. And suffering is us trying to force it down again and again. That's our avidya, our ignorance. And there's two levels of dukkha. There's the natural brokenness of the world, its conditioned, fragile form. The fact that each of us is not the exact personality we wish we were. But this is inevitable and part of the conditioned realm. The dukkha, the second layer, the second arrow, that the Buddha taught us to take out of the heart, was what we add on to that first arrow of dukkha by craving that it become otherwise with the energy of tanha and ignorance. It's the suffering that we overlay onto the heart when we become drunk on greed, drunk on hatred, drunk on delusion. And it's made worse when we run. The directive of the First Noble Truth to turn towards and comprehend suffering, to understand suffering, means to stand under suffering. Stand under it. And to see that if we're able to remain with the full catastrophe, or even just the little catastrophes, until that bright fissure line runs through the veneer of security which we think we've cultivated, even just the little hints at that, if we are able to see that and understand and let go of our white-knuckled grasping, trying to make this changing vortex of conditions a solid refuge, then as the hands release, we can step into something which is truly a refuge. And yet, we step onto the path, we intuit truth, we know the patterns we want to give up, and yet we're constantly, continually touched by the thread of dukkha, by the fact that things don't move as fast as we wish they were moving, by the fact that when we enter a meditation retreat, our project fails. But one of the important things to note is that if the conditioned realm is burning with greed, hatred, and delusion, our grasping to it, the only way we learn to let go of it is by being burnt again and again, a little bit, and having patience with that process. There's a monk named Ajahn at Wat Mapjan, and after a few years, he was just so frustrated that he ran up to my teacher, Longpo Anan, and said, "When will it be any better?" And Longpo said, "In 5 years, it'll be a little bit better." And yet you can also see that though in some sense it's slow, in another sense, this path works wonders on us. It moves through us so powerfully, like a sweeping wind. And when the Buddha speaks about refuge, he talks in one sutta about, it's the Sutta Mahanama, and Mahanama comes to the Buddha and says, "I see all your monastics are about to go off and wander on pilgrimage. Where should we dwell? Where should the mind dwell if we're always moving?" And the Buddha says, you should recollect the Tathagata, which is the Buddha. When one recollects the Tathagata, one's mind is not overcome with greed, not overcome with hatred, not overcome with delusion. One's mind heads straight based on that recollection. And when one's mind heads straight, one gains a sense of the Dhamma, a sense of the goal, joy connected with the Dhamma. In one of joyful mind, rapture springs up. In one of rapturous mind, the body becomes tranquil. The tranquil body leads to ease and happiness. The happy mind becomes concentrated. Of such a one, Mahanama, the noble ones say, amongst those who dwell out of tune, this one dwells in tune. Amongst those who dwell with anger, this one dwells without anger, having entered the stream of Dhamma. They recollect the Tathagata, the Buddha. And then he says the same with the Dhamma, the Sangha, with recollection of virtue, with recollection of giving, and with recollection of angels. And what I find so meaningful there is when he gives us these 6 refuges, when Mahanama says, all of us are about to wander, where do we rest? To know we are all wandering. We think we have these solid, we give ourselves a veneer of security, but always this realm can be shifting out of our hands. Always we are wandering. Samsara means endless wandering. And so this is the Buddha saying, this is where you find sanctuary, in these recollections. And when he says that when one recollects these things, one's mind is not overcome with greed, hatred, and delusion, and heads straight. And that one gains a sense of the goal. And that among those out of tune, one dwells in tune. Among one, having stepped into the stream of Dhamma, walks in line with the Dhamma. And what I find so meaningful there is that as you practice, this sense of dwelling in tune implies a greater harmony, which we begin to touch and feel. And it's so true that as you practice, when you break with that song that's guiding you, when you speak out of anger, when you waste your time with a conversation, when a relationship which should have ended has not yet ended, you feel it viscerally, that tuning fork in the heart. There's a new note that begins to rise. And when your life no longer accords with it, you feel the disharmony in your heart, in your chest. I once asked a nun what had kept her in robes after all these years. She was a Catholic nun named Florence. And she said, after enough years of practicing, that voice of God becomes the most important thing in the world. It becomes all that matters. And I've spoken before about this experiment they did with Gene Weingarten, a journalist did, where they took the world's foremost violinist, one of them, Joshua Bell, dressed him in street clothes and put him in a subway and had him busk to see how many people would stop and listen. And he was playing a $100,000 Stradivarius, and there's footage of person after person walking by and not noticing, except for the children who always tried to stop, or many of them did, before being yanked on by their parents. And he seems like a ghost. And then you realize that he's the only real one and everyone else is ghosts. And that when you begin to touch this subtle other harmony, it's completely different than the world, but it's completely in line with Dhamma. That this brokenness which so confuses and spurs us to run out of ignorance can instead become part of a path and an impetus to seek refuge in a part of the heart which is beyond all the vicissitudes, all the static, all the ups and downs of the conditioned realm, which we interact with, which we honor, which we love, but which we do not look to for refuge. Longpur Viradamo says, humility is a love of reality. And this is the shift, is that as you practice, when suffering comes up, when you have the difficult boss, the difficult relationship, the cancer, the understanding that your duty is no longer to run, but rather to seek to understand that suffering and to see it as a route towards a profound humility and compassion. Because when the heart opens in that way, it opens to others too. And we all know there's people in our lives who have run for so long that their hearts have become porcelain. There's no crack, no opening. And you see this as a practitioner when one of my prayers every morning is, humble me. Lord, humble me. I don't know what I mean by Lord there, but something. Universe, humble me. Because as you practice, you get the sense that when you are embarrassed, when you're wrong, when you've messed up, there is that bruise that moves through the body. There's that small child within you which rages and screams. And then, if you hold still with compassion and poise, on the other side of that, there's a quiet, and it's sweet and has a majesty to it. In that quiet is where the full wingspan of our spirit opens. And there's a note there, which is this note of Dhamma, which we tune ourselves to, which is utterly different than the world's, but is the hidden refuge that's always there. One of the most avant-garde pieces of music was written by Nicolas Cage, and he gathered a huge audience and a full orchestra, And the conductor raised the baton and lowered it. And for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, there was complete silence. That's the entire music piece. It's a completely silent music piece, but everyone is keeping perfect time. They turn the page at the same moment. And what happens if you honor the quiet note that emerges from silence in that way? And more than that, that when suffering really comes, there's a saying that if the devas, the angels, think they're immortal, and then the Buddha comes, and like a lion roaring would make all the animals quake, even so when a Tathagata emerges, the angels begin to shake and think, oh, we thought we were permanent, but we are impermanent. And this is a gift, is that when we, in our extremely privileged lives, see that fracture line coming into that perfect face of reality, or what we feel to be good enough, we remember that this human rebirth, this brief moment in a human life, when we've encountered the Dhamma, is unbelievably precious. And it's not going to be easy. Human life is not easy. Longpo Suchita says, we expect way too much out of human life. Human life isn't that great. And not that it can't be an enormous blessing, but only if we look at it as a tool on the path. The language of happiness is cheap. It will not sustain you. And it's true that this path is beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, beautiful in the end. It's true it leads to happiness. But a teacher, Buddhadasa, says that Dhamma is duty. And I find that if you're ever in doubt what your next step is, whenever I had a question of, should I remain a monk? That doesn't happen a lot, but every now and again you think, it'd be nice to have pizza at night or something, you know? It'd be nice to go to a movie. The question, what's best for me? It spins in circles. The question, what's the best gift I can give this world? What is the best use of this brief moment I have for others? That answer is clear. It rings clearly. That is the note you want to tune your life to. So to know that Dhamma as duty, to align with this, to understand that if you've come into contact with these teachings, that this is what you bring to the world, that no matter how you interact with the political situation, with your family, with illness, always, paramount, most of all, must be that cleansing and purification of the heart. Because that is what will carry. The history is littered with the memories of movements, of ideologies. But the notes that have continued to resonate are the Desmond Tutus, are the Nelson Mandelas, are Gandhi. It's those figures that have reached a root deeper to touch something profound, transcendent, humanizing in the human spirit. So however you move into these next years, however you move into this moment, don't forget your refuge. And your refuge is this quiet note of Dhamma. It is the practice. It is a movement towards what is true, transcendent, timeless. And when we speak about this note, the Buddha talks about these first three recollections, these first three sanctuaries of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the triple gem. And yes, you can think of it as the Buddha, our teacher, Siddhartha Gautama, after becoming awakened 2,500 years ago. You can think of it as the Dhamma, the teaching he left behind, the Sangha, those enlightened beings who came after him. But internally, you can also think of those just as the quality of the potential for awakening, which we all know is somehow what we are worthy of. When I was considering whether to ordain after college, the question that really drove home was how, and this isn't to say ordain or not to ordain, most people are not, you can live an amazing life of practice out of robes. But just to say, when we consider truly those two trajectories, a well-adjusted middle-class life or a life dedicated to awakening, I think a relevant reflection is just how big of a sample size do you need for one path? We know where that other one goes. We know what it provides, and at least I can speak for myself, I wanted more. I wanted more. The first video I saw of Longpor Cha sitting outside of a monastery in England, Paul Brider says the first time he met Ajahn Chah, he just thought he looked like a giant frog on his lily pad, delighted. And he said, I would do anything to be like that. And you see what these beings do, how their goodness radiates out. So internally, these qualities, the Buddha, our potential for awakening, the Dhamma, truth, the groundedness of Dhamma, and the duty that aligns us to that groundedness. The Sangha, what happens when that transcendent knowing comes to manifest in a human being, the love, the lightness. There's a beautiful sutta where a monk named Vakali is dying, and the Buddha comes to him and says, Vakali, do you have any regrets? And Venerable Vakali says, I wish I'd seen you more. And the Buddha says, what do you care for this putrid body? One who sees me, one who sees the Dhamma sees me. One who sees the Dhamma sees me. What does that mean? What does it mean to know that if we touch into this deep note which begins to rise as we practice, which we begin to hear more and more, which tunes itself to this deep note in the chest? There's some tribes that talk about a tapping in the chest being the direction, being their internal conscience. And I think we all know that tapping, that alignment. Sometimes it's so loud and sometimes it's gentle and quiet, but always it's there. What if we really understood that the Buddha didn't leave us? There's one who sees the Dhamma sees me. This Dhamma is timeless, a calico, ehipassiko, encouraging investigation. But one important point is that we get lost and we forget. We were interviewing Dr. Judson Brewer yesterday. He wrote The Craving Mind and was speaking about the research they've been doing into the default mode network. And they called it the default mode network because when they discovered it in the early aughts, it's a network that activates when you're doing nothing else. So they just thought, okay, this is the default. Actually, it's the network that activates when we're thinking in terms of self. But that's where we always fall back on. It's the default because that's where, when we're mindless, we retreat to. It's what we fall to. And when the Buddha talks about karma, he talks about bright karma, dark karma, both bright and dark, and neither bright nor dark. But that fourth is not neutral, it's the karma of the path, of the Noble Eightfold Path. So in all four, there's no neutral karma. And what that means for me is that every moment we're making a decision to either operate from knowledge or from ignorance. Every moment is a path. Every moment is a fork in the road. There's no moment lost. And what would it mean to really take that into account and make your life a work of art? We talk sometimes about one of our practitioners who made the determination to try to close every cabinet door in his kitchen as quietly as he could. To take that sort of care with every motion, every word. And because Chaitana, intention, is the paramount factor in the path, that means that if we approach our lives just as they are, with skillful intention, with a devotion to, Bhante Ji says, to transform your life into the path, keep in mind the intention, Nibbana Paccaya Hoti, may I develop towards Nibbana, Asavakaya Hoti, may I give up the defilements. If every action is taken with that, then our lives, mundane as they may seem, and you don't get much more mundane than sort of life at a monastery, it's pretty routine, becomes transcendent. It becomes a path. But to know that to do that, we have to tune ourselves, discipline, determination, pointing ourselves in the right direction, because if we don't make that determination, if we don't hold the path and honor it and frame it, then we fall back on the default mode. Then we sink automatically back into ignorance, into running. And this happens no matter what, to some extent. I mean, we can expect this to be part of our path, but how do we, to hold that note, how carefully does one have to carve the instrument? How carefully do you have to tune the strings? So to take that seriously, many people in this room have taken on the practice of doing 28 prostrations every morning, just to the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, at least bowing first thing in the morning, last thing at night, to what is most meaningful to you, because we all bow to something. If you don't think you're bowing to anything, you're bowing to yourself or career. We all bow to something. Make it explicit. Embodied acts change the heart. Make it explicit. These are ancient technologies of faith. Can you take one day a week and put it aside for practice? Hold the 8 precepts. Put aside entertainment for the afternoon. Let your friends and family know that this is the period when you'll be taking a walk with a good friend, with a spouse, and then maybe meditating, maybe cooking a dinner or not a dinner, that wouldn't work with the 8 precepts, but maybe make lunch or breakfast for someone, give to them. Hold, even God rested on that 7th day, so they say. And one day a week, Ajahn Chah said, look, the Uposatha day, he said, look, you lay people get 28 days a month, give the Buddha 2 days. And what about 4? What about once a week? 4 days a month, don't have to take the whole day, just a few extra hours in the afternoon at least. Can you get that daily meditation practice? Can you replace the political podcast with a Dhamma talk? Can you make a habit of giving, of feeding someone once a week, once a day? There's a practice in Sri Lanka called the Saraniya practice, where the monks won't eat until people won't eat until they've given food to another. So it takes determination to do these things, intention, and yet these are the structures that hold that note carefully, to come into community where others are holding to that same note, where that string is plucked and the sympathetic resonance between that same note and everyone else rises, and you feel once again, once a week, that your note is not alone, and it is louder and more meaningful and stronger than you thought. Despite the static of the world, despite the blaring headlines, despite the discord. So yes, listen for the note, but tune the violin. And the final things the Buddha says to recollect are sila, virtue, chaga, giving, relinquishment, the open hand, and the angels. And when I was a young monk, I told my teacher Ajahn, I don't know if you have a direct line to the angels, but if you do, if you could tell one of them that if I was allowed to see one, I'll ordain for life, I would really appreciate that. And he said, look, you're surrounded by angels. Look at all these great people. And I said, okay. So it was a good answer. But the point being that when the Buddha invokes that, he says, think of the devas, the angels. Whatever generosity they have in them, I have in me. Whatever virtue, whatever learning, whatever faith they have in them, I have in me. That image is the image of the awakened heart. Ajahn Sucitta says the Buddha had cosmology, we have psychology. If you want to, in one pure image, invoke what the bright, luminous heart looks like, an angel. and you see the brightness shining out of people. The root of the word deva is div, which can mean to shine or to play. And strangely enough, you see both. You see, even in the practitioners of deepest gravitas, of playfulness, and in all practitioners, I've never failed to see a lightening in the face. And this is why we look for refuge, because we're wandering. And the gift is that now that you've found this, no matter what else is happening in your life, no matter what ups and downs, tragedies, no matter what you're reading in the newspaper, you've won the jackpot, people. This life has been used well. You've come into contact with the Dhamma. In the Buddha says there are 8 unfortunate circumstances. 1, a Tathagata, a Buddha, arises in the world. He teaches the Dhamma, but one is reborn in a lower realm and does not hear it. The second, a Tathagata, arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma, but one is reborn as an animal and does not hear it. A Tathagata arises in the world, teaches the Dhamma, one is reborn as a god, does not hear it. One is reborn in an outlying land where the Dhamma does not make its way, so one does not hear it. One is reborn with wrong view and does not pay attention. One is reborn without the proper faculties and does not pay attention. Or one is reborn in the proper place with the proper faculties, with right view, but a Tathagata has not arisen in the world and does not hear the Dhamma. These are the 8 unfortunate circumstances. Bhikkhus, there is one fortunate circumstance. One is reborn in the right place, at the right time, with right view, with proper faculties, and a Tathagata has taught the Dhamma. You have stumbled on the one fortunate circumstance. It is precious. And there's a quote from the Course in Miracles, which I love. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. This is the peace of God. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. This is the peace of God. Everything we perceive that our senses can see, we see because it changes. There's a blind spot in the middle of the eye that we don't see because it's always in the same spot. And similarly, awakening, the great teachers say, is the one unchanging element, yet the one thing that's real. Everything else is a vortex of shifting change, and in some sense, it does not exist. Not really. And so when we turn towards what is real, towards awakening, we're turning towards the one path that has an end, the one path that is the greatest gift to those around us, and the one refuge which can truly hold us through all the ups and downs of life. So our current refuge may be in a gym, we might have a disco ball, it might be somewhat haphazard at the moment, but to know what communion you've touched, to know what goodness you've cultivated, to know what blessings we've come into contact with, and to understand our duty, our purpose in embodying those as beautifully as we can in our hearts, in every moment, for each other and the world. Good luck.
Han damayang damagatayo sadhu karang dadamase. Sadhu, 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 anumodani.
Another sign of the brokenness of samsara is your monk friend gets beaten up on a street as well, and we're really glad that Ajahn Kovilo is okay. So thank you for, making it back to us, Ajahn. We do have a chance for questions or comments, so if people want to raise their hand, we'll run a mic over to you, or if you're on Zoom, you can raise your cartoon hand. We can talk about anything.
So I'm just curious as to how this incident, the act of violence, has lived in your body. Do you have any wisdom around that?
Thank you. Just an update, anybody who didn't hear. I was traveling just a couple blocks, walking a couple blocks downtown, and kind of got jumped. It was more than kind of, I definitely got jumped. And just physically, the body has been taking a while to heal. Pretty much I'm back to normal. I had like lingering back pain, but we were in the middle of winter retreat. The next day, I had someone else, I think Doron, take over for the morning sit that started at 3:30 or whatever it was, and the midday sit, but was basically back to meditating for, at that time it was like 7 hours a day. So I had a whole week to kind of, it's perfect. And it wasn't even like I was cognitively processing this to try to create a better story, but I was just sitting, coming back to the breath, being, embodying. And I think that was just healing in itself. And the thoughts that would come up were just naturally, because have been doing it for years, is just thoughts of forgiveness, thoughts of embodiment, thoughts of not wanting to be angry. And fortunately, those kind of thoughts just didn't arise. And if they had, I know what my face feels like when I'm angry, and I don't like that feeling. And fortunately, it hasn't been coming up, and I haven't been feeding it at all. So, yeah, but who knows? Trauma really can be really deep, and but I feel like meditation, at least the kind of safe and supportive environment that I was really able to dive into, was just a perfect environment for me to process that, both physically and mentally. Yeah, even without trying to tell a better story. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you first talked about it, you talked about gratitude in this amazing way, and I wonder if that was protective for you, like subsequently now, because this is a couple weeks now. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. It definitely has. We live just such. There's just, for a monastic, who every single calorie that we eat every single day, and it's been like this for however many years we've been a monastic. All of that is a gift. We just have no physical reason to not be grateful. And just all those years of priming. And just seeing the value in gratitude for what I have, for the situation that wasn't worse, and seeing the detriment and the liability and the danger, the real danger, in letting my heart get dark and vengeful or wanting some kind of retribution. So. Yeah, gratitude has been, it's beautiful to see, and yeah, that's all I do.
It initiated the flood of the best emails we've ever gotten. Like 3 offers to set up an Uber account. One just if Ajahn Kovilo needs anyone to talk to. Another person thought he should go meditate at the place that it happened to sort of set up. It was a lot of care.
At one point, I started running, maybe like 30 seconds after it happened, and one of the emails was, "Never run." I didn't respond to that guy. Yeah.
If you're listening, we did appreciate that email, though. Yeah. We don't actually need an Uber account. We could get one, but the dependence which we have on people and needing to reach out is actually one of the most precious parts of our relationship, our vulnerability. But a lot of people have offered us that if we need to reach out for a ride, we can do that. So that is taken care of. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ajahn, for the presentation. You speak of suffering and 2 levels of suffering, and I've heard the story of Buddha, the 2 arrows. And the first arrow, we can't really do anything about. It's sort of inevitable. That's part of the, conditional. And the second arrow is what we can do something about. So, but you refer to the first level as suffering, and I'm wondering is it really suffering? Because the suffering is happening with resistance and craving and delusion. And then I have one more thing to add. This is Easter weekend, and in Christianity, as you know, suffering is sort of an important part of their belief and the whole passion of Christ. And I somehow think suffering does play a role in helping us to grow. And so that's the other aspect. Is there a necessary suffering in life?
Yeah, there's a few terms in Buddhism which really are impossible to translate completely. Dukkha has the etymology, so suffering, what we translate as suffering or stress. It can encompass everything from a slight stress to deep lamentation, sorrow, pain, grief, and despair, to just the unreliability of things. And actually, one of the etymologies is du, which means bad, and stra, which in Sanskrit means to stand. So standing badly, or also a wheel that's slightly off kilter. Du, bad, ka, the hub of a wheel, so slightly wavering. And the first level of dukkha, the dukkha of the three characteristics, as it's called in some places, of impermanence, the uncontrollability of circumstance, not self, anatta, basically, and dukkha. Yes, this is the baseline situation, and an arahant, an enlightened being, will encounter that same world with it is as it is, and not always as we would want it to be. And then, yes, the Buddha says the real problem is the second arrow, which is the dukkha of the Four Noble Truths, the dukkha caused by craving. And yeah, perhaps that might be more accurately translated as suffering, specifically, that second arrow. So there is an important distinction there, because that's the unnecessary bit where we overlay, where we struggle to make things different than they are. And not that we accept everything as it is, but there's a way of creating change that comes from a place where you understand how things are, and you're moving from a place of goodwill, of calm, and can make real change. But if it's coming from craving, and it shouldn't be this way, and reactivity, and that's where the second layer of unnecessary dukkha comes in. And stress is a good translation too. Like some people say, there's a story of one disciple who said to Ajahn Jeff, I don't suffer. And he said, are you stressed? And he said, I'm stressed all the time. And the issue with, I think Christianity, every religion to some extent is dealing with this key aspect of suffering. I think the issue, the beauty of the Buddhist precision with that distinction is that it really lets you separate one from the other. Whereas if you group both into this word suffering, you can really romanticize it, the suffering artist, And there's a type of suffering that's just ugly and unnecessary and caught up with craving. But then there's a type where if you let that go, you can exist in line with the Dhamma and the conditions as they are, and it's poignant and beautiful and fluid and graceful, the world is still changing, but it's not wound with that sort of craving and expectation. Longpo Sumedho has a great phrase for getting rid of that second arrow, which is just, it's like this. And then sometimes he'll add on, it's never been more like this than it is right now. So.
Hi. I've been thinking lately about how vulnerable we are as humans, and that dukkha is inevitable. We're vulnerable to the physical world, we're vulnerable to our minds, we're vulnerable to our conditioning, we're vulnerable to all the people around us. There's no way to not be within that vulnerability if you're a human being. And I've been thinking about right view, and I really appreciate your definition of it this morning. It's greed, hatred, and delusion. Knowing what is greed, hatred, and delusion. And the other thing, I've been saying a lot of metta. For a couple of months now, it's been kind of a lot of my practice. And I'd love for you to talk about this, kind of looking at metta as right view, and using metta as right view to help bolster it. Kind of the way I use it, and I also like how in every moment there's a choice of which way to go. you said it in a different way, I think, but there's a choice that we can make. And I try to practice with that, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I get caught in that comfortable place of being, hanging on, that, this is real. It's obviously real, come on. But yeah, anyway, I'd love for you to talk about that if you can. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I think in the West, really all over the world, metta or loving kindness practice is really kind of fetishized and boxed into this, okay, I'm going to say these exact words and think about this exact person. Okay, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. May my friend be well, may they be happy, may they be free from suffering, may my enemy, etc. Like very kind of formulaic, whereas the Buddha would sometimes talk about, it's in our chanting book, this radiation of loving kindness, where it is just a softness. It's the softness that we bring to practice, and that is, it allows us to have a right view. Like I think as you talk about vulnerability, meditation is just a beautiful place to practice vulnerability, and to have insight, to have wisdom, to be able to be with suffering, you have to be vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable, if you just run away from any kind of suffering, you just get up as soon as there's the tiniest bit of pain, yeah, you're living it's a shallow life. So yeah, when you sit a little bit longer than you're used to, that's vulnerability. Like being with, yeah, it's painful if it's slightly painful, and you don't want to push. You want to stay within your what's called the zone of proximal development in education theory. You don't want to just force yourself to sit some number of hours because that you think that's the ideal of what a practitioner should do. Stay within this zone, not too much, where it's just you're floundering. The mind is just shaking because it's too much dukkha. And if it's just not enough dukkha, if you've been, 5 minutes, I did my practice, that's just too shallow, and life stays shallow there. Whereas this zone of proximal development, you're growing, you're on the cutting edge of vulnerability, and you're learning how to, this is a tense spot, this is a pressure point. And if I can just stay with it, be vulnerable with it, it softens. It's like a trigger point manipulation, like in the body. You just press a point, and it's the most, seems painful for a while, but you just keep holding the pressure there, not going any deeper, and it just releases. And that's the softness there, the vulnerability there. That's loving kindness. That's metta. It's a practice of vulnerability, and it's leading to being able to see more clearly towards a right view that, it actually wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It was me that had a story around it, but yeah, in reality, it's not that bad. Yeah.
Just, acknowledging on one level we're vulnerable, very vulnerable. But the Buddha also says there's 5 kinds of loss: relatives, health, wealth, right view, and sila, virtue. And the first 3, he said, are trifling. We'll lose our health, we'll lose our wealth, we'll lose our relatives. We will. But right view and virtue, those you can keep. And those really no one can take from you. And I think that's worth a lot. That's the refuge too. And in terms of metta, the one very predictable thing you can see as people practice is they become more loving. The Buddha said the mind is radiant. It's defiled by passing defilements, or darkened by passing defilements. And one really interesting way those line up is there's a famous sutta called the Kalama Sutta, where the Kalamas are in doubt about rebirth and all these different teachings, and they ask the Buddha for advice. And he says, you are right to be in doubt. This is a doubtful matter. And then he basically brings them back to the basics. He says, when you act out of greed and hatred and delusion, is it for your own harm and others' harm? They say yes. Is it censured by the wise? Yes, it is. Basically, act out of goodness. So your own internal sense of kind of right action, what the wise praise. But then he adds something on that everyone misses, and he says, then develop loving kindness. And what's so interesting about that is loving kindness is such a simple, pure mind state. It's like a mirror. If you're ever in doubt, just come into a place of love and ask yourself a question, and there's no room for distortion or very little. Like often the answer will be right there. Right view will be right there because it's a simple, pure mind state devoid of much self at all. So, metta is the mirror too.
You had touched briefly upon the unfortunate circumstances and how we live in one of the fortunate ones. I was wondering, who does that we refer to? Is it those in this room or those or something else? And are there some events that could occur that could cause us to be then living in one of the unfortunate circumstances?
All right, let's see if I can navigate this one well. I think so. It's a really good question. First, baseline, in Buddhist thought, a human rebirth where you've encountered the Dhamma is unbelievably fortunate just as a baseline. It's so rare. And yet, it's a variegated human realm. I mean, you only have to look at the newspapers and see how brutal it can get. And certainly we could encounter those same circumstances. I would say that in terms of what is a privileged circumstance and what isn't, there is some, I think complicating that view is sometimes helpful. I knew some immigrant workers in Thailand who worked near the monastery from Burma, and they lived in shanties, and I'm not glorifying their poverty, but a lot of them were had quite brighter hearts than a lot of upper middle class people I meet here who are on the verge of suicide or otherwise. So I think the cleanest way to talk about this is acknowledging the violence in the world, acknowledging that some circumstances are very brutal. But I think one useful place to come back to is those 4 kinds of karma I spoke about: bright, dark, both bright and dark, which is where most of us reside, kind of a mix, and neither bright nor dark, which is the path. Is that any circumstance, whether a beautiful, blessed life or a brutal life in a war-torn zone, if approached with right view as part of a practice, can serve as part of the path. The path practice can transform all karma into path karma. And I mean, it's a bold statement, but I really think it's true. You read about Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, the most brutal work camps of Russia, and there were stories of people even there who were able to keep their hearts loving. And so rather than getting into the whole mess of comparing this circumstance versus that, I think coming back to that place of like, if we approach our life circumstances, whatever they are, with right view and an intention towards awakening, we can transform it into the path. Ajahn, would you add? Is that good enough? Cool. All right, good. Acknowledging I'm very privileged. It's in many, many ways. So we should wrap up, though.